The plasma bolts screamed past Commander Ashencross's head, close enough to singe his hair. He didn't flinch. 30 years of war had taught him that flinching got you killed. The Vrexian battlecruiser loomed above the shattered remnants of the human colony ship, its bioorganic hull pulsing with sickly bioluminescence. Cross's squad was down to 4 soldiers. The evacuation pod bay was 200 meters away, through a corridor that had become a killing field. "Move on my mark," Cross whispered into his comm. His voice carried the weight of someone who had given that order 10,000 times and watched half those soldiers never make it home. The Vrexians had appeared without warning 6 hours ago. Their invasion fleet had torn through the outer colonies like tissue paper. Cross had been visiting his daughter Sarah on the civilian transport when the first ships materialized from quantum space. She was 7 years old. She had his dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Her mother had died on Kepler Station 3 years back. Sarah was all Cross had left. "Daddy, I'm scared." Her small voice crackled through his helmet comm from the barricaded storage bay where he'd hidden the civilians. "I know, baby. Stay quiet for me. I'm coming." His team burst from cover. Plasma fire erupted from the Vrexian positions. Corporal Hayes took a hit in the shoulder and went down hard. Cross grabbed him, hauling him forward even as return fire from Sergeant Martinez bought them precious seconds. They made it to the next junction. 3 of them now. The ship shuddered. Hull integrity was failing. Cross checked his tactical display. The evacuation pods were almost ready. Almost. They needed 2 more minutes. He keyed the civilian channel. "This is Commander Cross. Prepare for immediate evacuation. Move to Pod Bay Delta on my signal." Movement flickered at the corridor's far end. Cross raised his rifle. The Vrexian warrior that emerged was different from the soldiers they'd been fighting. Taller. Its carapace gleamed with intricate markings. Royal Guard, Cross's combat computer identified. Where there were Royal Guards, there was royalty. The warrior didn't attack. It stood perfectly still, watching them with compound eyes that reflected Cross's squad in 1,000 fractured images. Cross kept his weapon trained on it but didn't fire. Something was wrong. Vrexians didn't hesitate. They didn't pause. They swarmed and killed with mechanical efficiency. "Commander," Martinez's voice was tight, "we've got movement from all sides. They're surrounding us." Cross's mind raced. This was a trap, but not the kind he'd expected. They weren't being killed. They were being herded. The Royal Guard shifted slightly, and Cross caught the gesture, an almost human wave toward the pod bay. "They're letting us go," Hayes whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. "Nothing about this makes sense," Cross replied. But sense or not, his daughter needed him. "Move. Weapons ready. If this is a trick, we make them regret it."
They advanced. The Royal Guard didn't follow.
More Vrexian warriors appeared in the side corridors, but none fired. Cross's combat instinct screamed that this was wrong, but his tactical mind recognized an opening. They reached the pod bay. The civilians were huddled near the airlocks, terror written across every face. Sarah broke from the group and ran to him. Cross caught her, feeling her small body shake against his armor. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." "Commander, we need to move now," Martinez urged. "Hull integrity at 15%. Cross nodded. He was about to give the evacuation order when the far airlock cycled open. The Royal Guard from before entered, but it wasn't alone. Behind it came a figure that made Cross's blood freeze. The Vrexian Queen. She was massive, easily 3 meters tall, her carapace a deep iridescent purple that seemed to absorb light. 4 arms, each ending in talons that could shred steel. But it was her eyes that stopped Cross. Unlike her warriors' compound clusters, hers were almost mammalian. Large, dark, and focused entirely on him.
The civilians screamed.
Marines raised weapons. Cross lifted one hand, signaling them to hold. Sarah pressed against his leg, small fingers gripping his armor plating. The Queen moved forward with fluid grace. Her Royal Guard fanned out but made no aggressive moves. She stopped 3 meters from Cross. When she spoke, her voice emerged from a translator unit embedded in her thorax, but beneath the mechanical rendering was something organic, something that carried emotion. Commander Ashton Cross. His name from her translator sounded like wind through canyons. "I have searched for you across 12 star systems and 4 years of war. You know my name. I know more than your name, human." The Queen lowered herself, bringing her massive head closer to his level. "I never forgot your hands." The words hit Cross like a physical blow. Memory crashed through him. A different battlefield, a different time. 4 years ago. The Vrexian forward operating base on Sigma Tertius. The Black Ops mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Cross and his team had been captured, held in biocells designed to break human minds. But there had been something else in those cells. Something the Vrexians had kept hidden. A juvenile. Small for a Vrexian, barely the size of a human child. Injured, dying. Cross had been locked in the adjacent cell. The creature had reached through the organic bars, whimpering in a way that transcended species. Cross had seen the damage, plasma burns, malnutrition, the kind of wounds that came for being used as a test subject. He'd reach back. His hands, human hands, had touched alien flesh. He'd had medical supplies in his tactical kit. He'd used them. For 3 days while he'd waited for extraction, he'd tended to that dying alien child. He'd shared his water. He'd talked to it in soft tones, the same way he'd talked to Sarah when she'd had nightmares. When his team had finally breached the facility, Cross had taken the juvenile with them. He'd carried it to the evacuation site. He'd watched it scurry into the jungle, alive because he'd chosen mercy over hate. "The juvenile," Cross whispered. The Queen's translator captured something that might have been a breath. "My daughter. My youngest child. You saved her when your kind and mine were slaughtering each other without pause. You had every reason to let her die. Instead, you gave her life." Sarah looked up at Cross, her young face confused but trusting. The Queen's gaze shifted to her. "Your offspring." "My daughter," Cross confirmed, pulling Sarah closer. "I understand." The Queen straightened to her full height. "I came to this battlefield not to conquer but to find you, to speak words that my kind does not speak to yours." She paused, and the massive chamber fell into absolute silence. "Thank you, Ashton Cross. Thank you for seeing my child as a child, not as an enemy. Thank you for having hands that healed instead of harmed." Cross felt something break inside his chest, something that had been hard and cold for so many years of war. "Your daughter, is she commands her own battalion now. She asked me to find the human who showed her that compassion could exist in the darkest places." The Queen gestured with one of her 4 arms. "This war has cost both our peoples more than we can measure. I cannot end it alone, but I can end it here, in this moment, with you," the ship groaned. Warning klaxons blared. "They were out of time. My fleet will escort your people to safety," the Queen continued. "No Vrexian will fire upon these vessels. I give you my word as sovereign and as a mother who owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Cross's tactical officer spoke urgently in his ear. "Commander, structural collapse imminent. We need to evacuate now." But Cross couldn't move. He stood facing the Queen of an enemy empire, the architect of so much human suffering, and saw reflected in her alien eyes the same thing he felt every time he looked at Sarah, desperate love for a child. The understanding that transcended words or species or war. "Why tell me this now?" Cross asked. "Why here?" "Because wars end, Commander. They end when someone chooses to remember kindness instead of vengeance. You gave me that choice 4 years ago. I give it back to you now." The Queen raised one taloned hand. It was a gesture of peace in her culture, Cross's combat computer informed him. "Your hands, human. I never forgot them. Let them be the first hands that build peace instead of the last that wage war." "Daddy, is the scary alien nice?" The Queen's translator caught something that sounded like laughter, soft and weary. "I have been called many things, small human. Nice is rarely among them." Cross made his decision. He lowered his rifle. Around him his Marines tensed, but they trusted him. They always had. He extended his hand, the same hand that had tended wounds in a dark cell, the same hand that had carried his daughter through nightmares, the same hand that had pulled countless triggers in this endless war. The Queen reached out. Her talon touched his palm, careful not to pierce the flesh. The contact lasted only a second, but Cross felt the weight of it, the promise, the hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there could be something beyond the killing. "Get your people out, Commander," the Queen said, withdrawing her hand. "My fleet will hold this sector." "When you reach human space, tell them what happened here. Tell them that the Vrexian Queen remembers mercy." Cross nodded. He scooped Sarah into his arms and gave the order. His people moved toward the evacuation pods with practiced efficiency. The Queen and her royal guard watched but didn't interfere. As Cross reached the airlock, he looked back one final time. The Queen stood alone in the dying ship, a massive figure silhouetted against the emergency lights. She raised her hand again. Farewell, salute, promise. Cross returned the gesture. The pod bay doors sealed. The evacuation craft launched into the black. Through the viewport, Cross watched as Vrexian warships moved into formation around them, not as hunters but as escorts. Sarah pressed against the window, her small hand leaving prints on the glass. Daddy, will the war stop now? Cross thought about hands that healed, about a dying alien child, about a queen who had crossed battlefields to say thank you, about the impossible fragility of peace. Maybe, baby, he whispered, watching the stars stream past. Maybe it will. Above them, the Vrexian flagship's massive hull gleamed in the light of a distant sun. Cross's comm crackled with incoming transmissions from Human Command, demanding explanations, threatening courts-martial, drowning in confusion and protocol. He'd have to answer eventually. He'd have to stand before admirals and politicians and explain how the enemy had become something else. But for now, he held his daughter and watched an alien fleet protect human lives, and he thought about a juvenile Vrexian reaching through bars toward kindness. Some debts transcended war. Some memories were stronger than hate. The Queen had said wars end when someone chooses to remember kindness instead of vengeance. Cross had made that choice once without understanding its weight. Now, hurtling through space toward an uncertain future, he understood. His hands had saved one life in darkness. That life had grown into power. That power had chosen to remember. Perhaps that was how wars truly ended, not with grand treaties or final battles, but with small moments of mercy that echoed across years until they became loud enough to drown out the guns. Cross closed his eyes and felt Sarah's heartbeat against his chest, steady and sure. When he opened them again, he saw his reflection in the viewport, a tired soldier holding his child, escorted by former enemies into the unknown. His hands had forgotten how to do anything but fight. The Queen had reminded him they could do more. They could build. They could heal. They could reach across the dark and touch something worth saving. The evacuation fleet crossed into human space 3 hours later. Cross spent those hours composing his report, knowing that every word would be scrutinized, that some would call him traitor, that others would demand he be court-martialed for fraternizing with the enemy. But he also knew that somewhere in the Vrexian command structure, a young officer with plasma scars carried the memory of human hands that had chosen compassion. That memory had just saved thousands of human lives. It might save millions more. The comm buzzed. Admiral Kerrigan's face appeared, hard with suspicion and exhaustion. Commander Cross, you have approximately 60 seconds to explain why Vrexian capital ships are escorting your fleet and why my strategic command hasn't blown all of you to atoms. Cross looked at Sarah, then back at the Admiral. Sir, I need to tell you about a choice I made 4 years ago. And about a queen who never forgot. He told the story. Every detail. The cell. The hands that healed. The battlefield reunion. The promise of peace. Kerrigan listened without interruption, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally, cautious hope. If this is a trick, Kerrigan began, then I'll face the consequences, sir. But it's not a trick. It's a debt being repaid. Cross paused. And maybe it's a chance. The only one we're going to get. Behind him, Cross could see the bustle of Fleet Command, officers rushing between stations, the organized chaos of war. Finally, the Admiral nodded. I'm ordering your fleet to dock at Firebase Meridian. You'll be quarantined and debriefed. As for the Vrexian escorts, he rubbed his face, looking older than Cross had ever seen him. I'll hold fire. For now. But, Cross, if this goes wrong, it's on you. Understood, sir. The connection cut. Sarah had fallen asleep against Cross's shoulder, exhausted by terror and confusion. He held her gently, watching through the viewport as the Vrexian ships began to peel away, their mission complete. The flagship lingered longest. Cross imagined he could see the Queen in her command chamber, watching the human fleet reach safety. His tactical officer approached. Martinez, reliable Martinez, who had fought beside him through hell. Permission to speak freely, sir? Always, Sergeant. That took more courage than any battle I've seen. Martinez met his eyes. But it's going to get harder now. The fighting part was easy. Convincing everyone else that peace is possible. That's the real war. Cross nodded. Martinez was right. The battles ahead wouldn't be fought with plasma rifles and tactical strikes. They'd be fought in committee rooms and diplomatic chambers. They'd be fought against prejudice and fear and the momentum of decades of bloodshed. They'd be fought by people like him, Soldiers who'd seen too much death and finally understood that victory wasn't measured in enemy casualties but in lives saved. "Then we fight that war," Cross said quietly. "The same way we fought all the others. One step at a time. One choice at a time. One hand at a time," Martinez added, a small smile touching his scarred face. The firebase meridian loomed ahead, a massive military installation bristling with weapons and suspicion. Cross could already imagine the interrogations, the skepticism, the uphill battle to make anyone believe that the enemy queen had shown mercy. But he'd been in impossible situations before. He'd survived when survival seemed impossible. He thought about the queen's words. Wars end when someone chooses to remember kindness instead of vengeance. Those words would be tested in the days ahead. They'd be challenged by every person who'd lost someone to Vrexian weapons, every politician who'd built their career on war, every admiral who knew only how to fight. But Cross had something they didn't. He had the memory of a dying child reaching through darkness. He had the weight of a queen's gratitude. He had his daughter sleeping peacefully because an ancient enemy had chosen to honor a debt. He had hope. The evacuation fleet docked. Marines swarmed the arrival bay, weapons ready, scanning for threats that didn't exist. Cross carried Sarah through the corridors, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the fear. He'd file his report. He'd face the tribunal. He'd tell his story until someone listened. And somewhere in Vrexian space, a queen would be fighting her own battles, convincing her people that humans could be more than enemies. 2 leaders, 2 species, 2 sets of hands reaching across an abyss of blood and history. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast, but it would be possible. Cross reached his assigned quarters and laid Sarah on the bunk. She stirred, opened her eyes halfway. "Are we safe, Daddy?" He thought about that question. Real safety felt impossible after so many years of war, but looking at his daughter, remembering the Queen's promise, feeling the weight of mercy given and received, he found an answer. "We're safer than we were, baby, and tomorrow we'll be safer still." That's how it works. Little by little, hand by hand, until the day we don't have to be afraid anymore. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes. Within moments, her breathing steadied into sleep. Cross sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees. These hands had killed. They'd destroyed. They'd pulled triggers and thrown grenades and ended lives without counting. But they'd also healed. They'd saved. They'd reached through bars to touch dying alien flesh with gentleness. The Queen had said she never forgot. Cross understood why. In war, kindness became the rarest currency. It became the thing that proved you were still human, still capable of something beyond violence. One act of mercy, barely remembered, had cascaded across years into this moment. His comm chimed. Message from Fleet Intelligence. "Report for debriefing at 060 hours. Expect extensive interrogation. Subject to potential court-martial pending investigation. The bureaucracy of war grinding forward, skeptical and slow." Cross didn't care. He'd faced worse than tribunals. He sent his acknowledgement and settled back to watch his daughter sleep. Outside, 2 fleets that had been trying to annihilate each other for decades held their fire because one soldier had treated an enemy child like a child. That was worth fighting for. That was worth every battle ahead. The stars wheeled past the viewport, indifferent to human or Vrexian concerns. But somewhere among them, in the vast dark between worlds, the possibility of peace had taken its first fragile breath. Cross closed his eyes and remembered the weight of alien talons touching his palm. Remembered the Queen's voice saying, "Thank you." Remembered that even in the darkest places, even in the heart of war, hands could choose to heal. And in the morning when he faced the tribunal, when he fought to make them believe that mercy was strength and not weakness, he'd remember Sarah's question, "Are we safe, Daddy?" And he'd work toward the day when the answer would finally, completely be yes.